Okay, so when you open up Premiere, it'll probably prompt you for like, a new project, open a recent project. I created a new project. I'm gonna name it. We'll call this just demo video. And I'm gonna make sure it's not hidden in some sort of like vault somewhere that I can't access. So I'm gonna put it on, I'm gonna choose the folder that I have that I unzipped that had our example frames and sound. I'm gonna choose that. Call it demo video. You should be able to leave everything else default generally. I wouldn't worry about messing with any settings. All right, so this is Premiere. The first thing I would do, so like basically we have a window up here that has a little sort of preview for any source materials that you're looking at, like which like just means like any videos or like video frame clips that you bring in. You can sort of like look at those individually, or like listen to audio. Effect controls would be like where you look at if you add any effects. We'll probably add some effects today. I never mess with metadata and audio clip mixer. Yeah, I don't really use that ever. Timeline is just like in Blender. The timeline is just like a sort of like layout of video in time. I guess I don't really have to explain that at this point. And then down here will be like where you have all your assets for your video, where you can see outlined all the things you import that you want to use in your video. So I want to import some stuff. I'm going to double click in there to bring up that import window. And I'm going to go to that folder that I downloaded and unzipped from the class notes. I'm going to go to frames. And I have 3 different like shots. I basically just took the frames from each different. I added another scene at the end of the example, sort of like Rube Goldberg I made, and I just sort of broke those down into different shots. I rendered them all out to be like a 389 frame video, but I just kind of broke them up so you can kind of use them as separate clips and see what that looks like. So I'm going to go to shot 1, and I'm going to go to the first frame, which is 0001. I'm going to click on options down to the bottom left, and I'm going to choose image sequence. If I didn't have image sequence checked, I'd just load a still image, and I just have that first frame, and it wouldn't be anything moving at all. And sometimes you want to use still images, but not in this class because we are animating. If I double click on that, it'll show the source preview up here in this window. I can hit play and see what that looks like. I also turn on motion blur whenever I render out these frames so we can see how that looks. So this clip only goes to that spot right there. I'm going to keep loading, so I'm going to go. Oh my God. To the shot 2 folder. Again, choose the first one in the sequence. Make sure image sequence is selected. I'm going to double click on that, make sure that's good. Looking good. I also added like a background to this to kind of place it in some kind of, I don't know, funky world instead of like a blase gray universe. That looks good. And then frames, I'm going to choose my third folder. Again, go to the first frame in that batch, which is 332. Make sure image sequence is checked. It looks like it just stays on after you turn it on. Double click on that, get a little preview. Boom. So that's the final shot. So one way I will So we need to create a timeline here. And it gives you a little hint right here in the timeline, drop media here to create a sequence. So I'm going to, first I'm going to choose this first one that I loaded. You can tell it's the first one because you can see 0001.jpg. And I don't like that name because it means nothing to me except that it's the first frame. So I'm going to right click on it and choose rename and just call it hammer hit. This one will be domino drop, and then domino fall and drop are basically the same thing. I'll call this one cup stuff. Okay, so we got hammer hit, domino fall, and cup stuff. So I'm going to take the first clip in this sequence. I'm just going to left click, drag, and then drop it over here in the timeline. And it creates a new timeline for me. So now I see a clip loaded called hammer hit. And we see that it goes until, if I move this, if I left click and drag, which is the opposite as in Blender, which is right click and drag to scrub through the timeline. If we left click and drag in Premiere, we can go to the last bit of this clip. See that it goes 6 seconds, 11 frames. And I noticed after I dragged some media into the timeline, it created a new asset in our project folder over here, and that is a timeline. And you can tell which one that is because it has this little icon in the bottom right that looks like this scrubber and like a couple of these clips at the bottom. And if you kind of just like drag your mouse across these, it'll kind of like quick scrub through that clip, which is very helpful. So I'm going to right click on this this sequence that we just made. Once I dragged media into that timeline, it created a timeline sequence. And that's what this is right here. I'm going to rename it so I don't get confused as to have two hammer hits. I'm like, what is what? I'm going to rename it to midterm sequence. Cool. And I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to go to properties. Or no, sequence settings, rather. And I'm just going to look at what it auto-generated. So right now, it sort of just picked up on the asset that we loaded, which I rendered out at 1080p, which is 1920 horizontal pixels by 1080 vertical pixels. The aspect ratio was set to square pixels, which I would leave alone. These settings should be good going forward from just drawing like an image, or from importing an image sequence to create a new timeline sequence. What it auto-generates should be good. Right now, the time base is 29.97 frames per second, which is pretty standard in like the US for sort of like broadcast TV. That's changing a lot. Sometimes you'll see 60 frames a second for like super HD things, maybe on some streaming services. 24 frames a second is what you see when you're watching like cinema, when you're watching a film. That is basically the lowest amount, well, not the lowest amount, that is like the amount of frames you can see in a second that looks believable and looks realistic as like something that is truly in motion. Because when we're watching a video, it is really a sequence of images like fired quickly that is like tricking your brain into thinking you're seeing something that is moving. Some animations, like typically like hand-drawn animations, will work at something like 12. to 15. Like if you see like claymation, sometimes that's like 12 frames a second. But I would say if you want to work in 24 frames a second, that's fine. But like the defaults frames per second that occurs in Blender is 2997 or 30, which is essentially the same. And I would just go with this. And if you want to do the math, this first sequence that I dragged in here was how many frames? That was 192 frames. And so if you do some math here, you got 192 frames, and this video is running at 29.97 frames per second. You can do some math. What? 29.97. It should be 6.5 seconds long. And when I look in this timeline, it is about 6.5 seconds long. And when looking at this this number here, these last this like the 1 here, these last digits here, these aren't like percentage of seconds. They are like counting the frames. So we are looking at right now in the timeline, we are at 6 seconds, 11 frames. If we count up to, it should go up to like 29, and then click over to 7. So every 30 frames, there is a new second. So just so it's clear how this sequence is like counting time, it goes frames, second, minutes, hours. All right. Lots of technical shit here. So what's next? Okay, so we have our first clip in. Let's start bringing in some other ones. The next one in the sequence is domino fall. So I'm just going to click, drag that one. And if you notice, when you're moving things around in the timeline, it will auto snap the beginning of one to the end of the last clip. And I'm going to bring cut stuff also. If I want to see what more, like after I dragged that last clip in, it was kind of, I couldn't see the end of it. If you want to see, if you want to expand your view in the timeline window here, there's a slider at the bottom that you can click and drag to move around. But if you want to see, if you want to zoom out your view to see more time in that window, you just click on one of these little circles at either end, and that'll expand the timeline temporally. Yeah. So if I move the timeline to beginning, hit space to play, or you can hit play up here. You can see this. Play out. And you notice we have different layers. So you can have, these are video layers that are marked by V's. So V1 is video layer 1, V2 is video layer 2, and 3, yada yada. Below that, working outwards in the opposite direction, is A1 for an audio layer, A2 for audio 2, and so on. You can have, I don't know if there's a limit to how many like video or audio layers you can have, but the more you have, the more intense it's going to be to load everything. But we don't really have to worry about this for this project. So if you want, like in one of these layers, I could move this second clip so that it overlaps with the first one. If I hit play, it just switches straight to the next one. I could have that fade if I wanted to. If I click on this effects tab at the top, well, let's see here. Whoa. Do we have another place for these effects? It's less intense. 1 second. Effects. Yeah, so the effects are also located in this window here. You just kind of have to click on this arrow to choose that It's just kind of hidden because my screen is kind of compressed a little bit for the projector. I'm going to look at, so we have, if you click on effects down here, bring up that window by clicking on these arrows, drop down. You can see video effects. And if you want to do effects to your animation in post, please do if you want to play around with these. Some of them are just kind of cheesy. We have some blur. There's maybe the only ones that would really make sense for this would be like something like image control, or adjust if you want to adjust levels. So if I go to adjust and choose levels and then click on that and drag and then drop. And then if I go to the top, this top left window, I see a little tab here that says Effect Controls. And I'm going to click on that clip that I just added the effect to. And now we see this levels effect here. We also see something which every clip has, which is motion and opacity and time remapping. Motion is if you wanted to have your video animate like this, in the video. I don't really see the point in that. But you can animate. Sometimes it makes sense to animate video layers to have them move. Say for instance, you had a still background and you had a character moving in the foreground and you wanted to create some sort of cinematic parallax motion. You could have that background just sort of slowly pan. That's one way. You can adjust scale. I'd leave it at 100. And then also you can do opacity. I'm going to do an opacity keyframe for this, just to show you one way in which you could fade between two video layers. So I'm going to move the timeline to the end of our first clip of Hammer Hit. And if I'm clicking and dragging, left click and dragging this timeline scrub around, if I hold shift, it'll auto lock to the beginning or end of any clip. So I'm going to do that I'm going to auto lock holding shift and dragging to the end of Hammer Hit. And then I'm going to click on Hammer Hit. I'm going to go to opacity in the effect controls up here. And then I'm going to say that value is going to be 0. Oh wait, I did it to the wrong clip. I'm going to do that to domino because domino is what's going to be fading in. So at this same point in time, I'm going to go to opacity. It's set to 100%, which is what I want it to be at this point in time. And to the right of that, there's this little icon that looks like the keyframes we have in Blender. I'm going to click on that, and we see in a little timeline next door to that, we added a keyframe. And then I'm going to scrub back in time, go to the first frame in Domino Fall, and then I'm just going to change that value by clicking and dragging to 0. And it automatically added a keyframe to that. It's kind of hidden, but you just saw that pop up right there. So now if I hit play, we can see those fade. Another way, if you wanted to have a fade transition, give me a break here, is with an effect. So down in our effects folder, down here, there are video transitions. And so these are a lot of different sort of auto-generative ways to make a clip go in or out of a scene. So I'm just gonna choose, let's see what happens if I do iris box, and I just drag that onto. So if I click and drag this and then like hover over these clips, you can see if I go to the end or beginning of one clip, it'll like become highlighted. If you go to like the where two clips meet, it'll like bridge those. So if I drop, oh, that gave us an error because we don't have enough frames. But anyways, there's our transition. I just dragged that and dropped it in between these two, and it gave me a transition. If I wanted to delete that, you can kind of just like click on that, get it highlighted, hit delete on your keyboard, it's gone. Same can be done. There's cross dissolve is a common one. Under dissolve, under video transitions, choose cross dissolve, drop that in between these two, blah, blah, blah. Give me that error. Doesn't seem to really matter. So the reason it gave me that error is because you can see at a certain point we see our layer, our domino fall scene ran out of frames. So it just kind of stands still. If we wanted to, and I didn't have that problem with this fade over here because like I had them overlap. These two frames aren't overlapping, so at a certain point one runs out of time and it just switches over to the next one. All right. I don't really want that right now. Another thing you can do in this timeline, I realize this is sort of like redundant for some people that use this, but you can cut and change the lengths of your clips. If I hover towards the end of one of these clips, you see these this little red arrow comes up. If I click, I can then like change the length of that clip. It doesn't change the speed, it just makes that clip shorter. It just like sort of shortens that to wherever you bring it to in the future, or you know, along the timeline. I could also make it cut. If I bring my timeline to the end of this hammerhead and I'm like, I want it to start exactly at this point, I could choose this little blade over here, the razor tool, and then I could click right there, and then go back to my selection tool, and then now I just cut that clip into two pieces. And if I wanted to just return this this one to its original state, I could just like delete half of it and then extend it. So yeah, real basic stuff. I'm going to, I don't really care about these transitions, honestly, so I'm going to get rid of them. But I just wanted to make, do a little demo, show how you can use those if you so choose to do so. So I got rid of these just by unclicking that little stopwatch. When I add keyframes to a scene, well, you start adding them by clicking that on, and to remove all keyframes, you click it in, toggle it off, and it removes all keyframes from said clip. So now I have I'm going to save, Command S. I have my timeline, I have my video. It's almost 15 seconds. I'm almost there for the midterm. I gotta have something else going on at the end, whatever happens once this like little weight drops. Maybe there's an explosion or some neon sign turns on that says congratulations. But I'm almost there. But I'm gonna start adding some audio to this. So I'm gonna go to my bottom left window here. We are in the effects folder. I'm gonna go to the left where I can't really see on my screen. You probably can in yours. I'm gonna go to Project. So clicked on these arrows, went to Project. And I am going to add some new assets to my project. So I double clicked in that window, just sort of like in empty space. And I'm going to go into my example files, and I'm going to go to the sound clip folder. I'm going to choose all of these WAV files. Any audio file you get from Freesound or whatever will probably be WAV, AIFF, which is standard for a lot of Macs for some reason, and or MP3s. And before I forget, let me just start passing around attendance. So we got a couple WAV files here. If I double click on one, it'll give me a little preview window up here, and if I hit play, I don't know if anybody can hear that. What we got? This is like, it sounds like a pool ball being hit. There you go. It's yours. It's ready. So I feel like I chose that sound because I wanted it to be right here where this ball gets hit. So I want that sound to be like about where contact happens here. And I'm gonna left click on that and then drag it into my scene here. And I want to see a little bit better what's going on here. Like I'm focusing on what's happening right here in the timeline. I don't really care what's happening to these other clips at the moment. So again, I'm gonna like zoom in my view by clicking on one of these circles down here, the timeline slider, and zooming in like that. And when you drop audio files into the timeline, they'll give you a little waveform image of what's going on. So what you're seeing here is like the volume of the clip that you just loaded. And as you would imagine, this little spike right here is the sound we want. So, and if I drag this through the timeline, it'll give you a little like choppy, glitchy preview of what's going on with the audio at that moment. But we can see that sounds a little early for me. I want it to go right, bam, there. There? No, there. That's where I want this peak to be. So I'm just going to left click and drag that a little bit into the future until that waveform peak is at the point in time where I just scrub through where there's contact. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to go to the beginning and play that real quick just to see how that feels. So one other thing that's going on is there's another sound in this clip that I don't really want, which is the sound of like someone like hitting another ball with the pool cue. Cue, right? Yeah, cue. Stick. So I want to nix that from the audio because there's nothing going on visually that like syncs up with that. So one thing I could do is I could just sort of go right about here just before we start to hear anything. And I could just use my blade tool, snip it right here, choose selection tool, select that first part, hit delete, and be done with it. So now if I hit play, it's just that. We also have some audio that's sort of like some like audio noise that's happening after that hit. If we listen, I don't know if you can tell from these speakers here, but it's like some little, it sounds like what we're hearing is like the sound of someone like breaking, like doing the first hit on like a pool game, and then like you can hear the other ball sort of like hitting and interacting in the background, and I want to get rid of those sounds. I just want that one hit. So I could just, probably the easiest way to do that is I could just sort of like, sounds like the first of those like resonant hits is right here. I could just go right here, just before that, like scrub just before that. Again, choose my blade tool, snip, select the rest of it, hit delete. Another thing And so like right now we have like audio, and like if we once we get to the end of this clip, you can see there's something going on. If you look to the right, there's like a decibel level of like how loud our scene is. And we see we get to the hit. That's pretty loud. But we can see that there is something going on up until the end of that clip. So if I wanted to make that clean, I'd want to have that sort of fade out. So a quick way to do that is like using sort of like a same thing we did with like the transitions earlier with video, you can do with audio. So I'm going to go to the top left of my screen here and choose my not effect controls. Oh yeah, I'm going to go to the bottom left, sorry. Choose my little arrows here. Go to effects. I'm going to go to audio transitions. Which one do I want? Let's try constant power. I feel like it's telling us to use this because it's highlighted in blue. Thanks, man. No problem. And I'm going to click and drag that. No, I don't want that. So what happened is I dragged that on there, and let's see what happens. Oh, no, it worked, kind of. Yeah. They just went bam. We can see towards the end, it starts to fade out. I'm gonna play around with some other ones, though. I'm going to like sort of click inside of that clip until we have that little effect selected, that constant power effect selected in the middle. I hit delete. I'm going to try constant gain. And if you notice when I'm hovering this, like I clicked and dragged that effect and I'm hovering it over my audio clip. When I hover to the right, we see an icon where we see like a little square within like a blue bar on the right. That means we're fading out. So with the blue bar on the right, that means we're adding the effect to the end of the clip. And if I move it to the left, that little icon changes. So now the blue bar is on the left. That means that we were adding that effect to the beginning of the clip. So if I did that, that means that it would fade in the audio. And if we play that, maybe it's hard to notice, but that hit at the beginning is not very loud because it's like sort of slowly fading in the volume. So it's sort of working in inverse action as to what we're trying to do, or with what is going on in the audio file. But if I drag that and move it to the right, make sure that little blue bar is on the right of that little icon, then I'm adding it to the end. And then we have a nice smooth fade out and a nice clean audio effect. All right, I'm going to go back to my project folder, and I am going to see what else we got here. So we got a dominoes. Oh. We have pin hits. What is that? Oh, I'm going to double click on that. We have glass. So pin hit is when it hits the pen is when I want to use that one. I already that's why I labeled that. So I'm gonna move forward in the timeline, find where that pin gets hit. Left click on that, drag it into the scene. It looks like I was pretty good on winging it there. Let's see what happens if I hit play. Oh, beautiful. I'm a pro. But just to be a nerd about it, I'm gonna like hit left and right on the keyboard and kind of like get right up until that point. And it looks like actually it's off a little bit. So I'm gonna zoom in real close and just like move it a little bit, like one frame over. Oops. Cool. So now we have hit sound. And, you know, right now it's just the sound of the pin getting hit. But, you know, when two objects collide, they both make a sound. So I'm going to take this same clip I used for that being hit, the ball being hit, and I'm going to add it to the same. I'm going to copy it I'm gonna select it. I'm gonna go Command C. I'm gonna move about here in the timeline, and I'm gonna do Command V. And when you copy and paste clips, they tend to go to the top layer in order. So right now I have 3 layers, and all 3 of these are highlighted blue, which means they are sort of like active. So it shows the top one. If I were to go and click on these, and so only A3 is selected, and then hit Command V to paste, you would paste it on that layer. So if you're trying to be deliberate about where you're copying, pasting things, make sure you have the correct layer you want to be working on highlighted in blue. Otherwise, like if you have A2 selected and then I go here and I hit Command V, it's going to drop it on your other clip, and you don't want that. So I'm going to have these sort of sync up. I'm going to zoom in, nudge it just like 1 frame, see how that works. See how that looks. All right, got it. Hit. And you know what? I'm gonna like change the tone of that ball being hit a little bit, just to like add a little bit of like sort of like I don't know, randomness, or like sort of like, so it's not like so monotone. And sometimes, you know, sounds change depending on your position in a room, depending on the velocity of an object. So just to kind of add some like variance to the scene and a little more realism, I'm going to change the pitch of this second ball hit. So I'm going to, let's see here. Let me do it here. Oh, here, we'll go to Effect Controls. All right. So I'm going to go to this bottom window, again, go to my Effects folder. I'm going to go to Audio Effects, and let's see, Pitch Shifter. So I'm going to choose Pitch Shifter. And if you know what you want, you can kind of just type it into this like search window up here. You know, just like typed in Pitch Shifter came up. I'm going to left click drag that onto that audio clip. And so that kind of pops up in our effects control window when I select our clip. Make sure you select your clip, not your constant gain effect. And now we have Pitch Shifter as an option to edit. And if you go to Custom Setup and then choose Edit, you have some options. There's some presets probably. Angry Gerbil, Deathly, Stretch, the Dark Lord. These are sort of like extremes. We could do Dark Lord and see what that sounds like. And if you just sort of scrub, you can tell it just made it much deeper. If we do Angry Gerbil, and I'm sure it'll be a little high-pitched and shrill. Yeah, a little bit. I don't want any of those. I'll do default. And I'm just going to... Semitones is like sort of fine-tuning, and sense, I think, is like, you know, more dramatic ways of adjusting. So I'm just going to do semitones like -2. So if we listen to it, the whole thing. You know, this is like one of these like sort of like fine-tune adjustments that I had when I'm trying to create like a sort of more realistic environment. You know, we're working in 3D space. We're making a 3D animation. So sometimes you're trying to think about like, you know, a shot, how far is that object from the camera? And like, what are the things around it? Is it in like an empty hall? Like, should I be adding reverb to this? Like making it sound like it's echoing in a chamber? Is it like a dead room? Is it like sort of like no reverb? And those choices are sort of like up to you as to like what kind of world you're creating, you know, and like the sort of perspective you're trying to create for the viewer. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go to this domino fall, and I'm going to like kind of start where it's that chain reaction is really beginning, like about here. I'm going to go back to my project folder. I'm going to choose dominoes.wave. I'm going to drag this into the audio 2 folder or layer. See how that works? So what I'm going to try and do here, and I didn't try this beforehand to see if it was actually going to sound good at all, but I'm going to, so right now we have a clip of dominoes falling, and I'm like, oh, I have this event that I created in this animation, which involves like, you know, all these different interactions. There's like the sound of this first domino hitting the next one, and then the sound it makes when it hits the ground, and then so on and so forth. So that's a really complicated audio event to try to like engineer. I mean, I could find like one clip of like some sort of like click, like the sound of a domino going click. And if you have like, you know, all your smartphones have like, all of your phones have like sound recorders on them. You can be your own like sort of like Foley like sound like recording artist, and if you have an object near you that could make the sound you want, just record it and bring it into your scene, you know? So what I'm trying to do is like I have this lengthy event that is very complicated. I found an audio clip that is of the event I want to occur, but the timing's weird. Like I only have like something that's like half the dominoes or whatever. So let's think about different ways we could try to like have this whole thing play out. It seems like it's moving faster than what I have in the video too, so I want to kind of like maybe stretch out the time of this clip so it like matches what's going on, or it match out the audio, or stretch out the audio clip so it matches more what's the events that are happening in the video. So to do that, there's an effect. I'm going to go to my effects folder, take away the search. I'm going to go to audio effects, and then pitch shifter, stretch. I'm trying to remember which one it is. Stretch. Or maybe it is just pitch shifter. Oh, here's what you can do. Right click. So if I right click on my audio clip and then go to speed duration, it brings up some options for me. We have a speed in a value of percentage. So right now it's playing at 100%, which is the original speed of the clip. And then below that we have duration. So if I change speed to be 120, it changes the duration of that clip. If I go up in value, the clip goes faster. If I go to like 50%, clip is longer, and I can also just drag the duration to the amount of time I want it to occur. I'm going to real quick. So it starts here, and I'm looking at my timeline here, that's about 7 seconds. And this ends at about 10 seconds. So I want this clip to be at least 3 seconds long, and we'll see how that sounds. So I'm going to right click on my domino falling clip, go to speed duration, and I'm going to click and slide the duration until it's like three something. I'm just going to like wing it, something around 3 seconds. And again, this second set of values from the right is seconds, and the ones on the far right are frames. If I wanted to, I could reverse the speed, have it be all spooky. I don't want to do that. I'm going to click maintain audio pitch. I'm going to do it without maintain audio pitch first, and we'll see what happens. And I'm just going to hit OK. So it looks like we have more time now for that clip. It's stretched out. You can see it visually stretched out. And I'm going to go play, see what's going on. That's much closer to what I actually want to see. But it's like all like deep and heavy, you know, because of that, it stretched it out, and when you stretch out audio, it automatically will lower the pitch of that sound. And because the pitch is like now lowered, when I play that, it kind of gives me the feeling that these dominoes are like the size of doors or something, because they are like deeper sounding and sound like they have more weight and volume. So I'm going to Command Z, undo that, and I'm going to do speed duration, drag it up, and I want to make it a little bit over, I want to make it 311, and choose maintain audio pitch. And so what that's going to do is it's going to try and keep the pitch the same as what it is in the original clip, while also stretching it out. And okay, sometimes this just sounds kind of crazy, so we'll see how it sounds. Yeah, it sounds kind of messed up. But, you know, sometimes that's just how it sounds. You know, maybe that works for you. You could do some other things to maybe clean that up. Maybe play with EQ, or, you know, maybe we could right-click on that speed duration, unclick maintain audio pitch, and we could try a different effect to change that pitch. We could go to audio effects, and we could just do what we just did, pitch shifter, edit it, and do like high precision and bump that up to like 7. See what that does. And it's not playing. I don't know why. Yeah, that didn't really do anything good. So I'm going to delete that. Anyways, those are options if you're trying to like match the speed of a sound to match the timing of something that's happening on your video. Right-click on it, speed duration. You can also do that with your video clips, but if you do that, it might look a little choppy because it's sort of like creating frames in between frames that didn't exist. So it's going to look choppy. So we had one more file here in my project folder. We had glass, and that's for the cool little dink sound it makes when this domino goes inside the glass. So I'm going to left-click on that, drag it in. Oh, I didn't render correctly because I'm seeing that domino, but whatever. Like so. I don't really feel like doing anything else to that cup sound. It kind of just works. But one thing I do want to do is add some emphasis to that first hit. Like, it's like whack, but it kind of just falls dead. And I don't know, like it just kind of falls flat. It doesn't feel like that's like the first action that's supposed to be like, boom, this animation is starting. It's getting whacked. I'm going to add some reverb to that at the beginning so that it feels like, I don't know, that it has emphasis. Like so that like that you can feel like that the impact of that has sort of reverberated around the room. So I'm going to go to my effects folder, and I am going to look for, I'm just going to type in so I don't have to look, reverb. And I'm going to do studio reverb. I'm going to drag it onto that first clip. Now I'm going to play it just to see how it sounds. You can hear it a little bit. I'm going to go to edit. There's a lot of parameters to play around with here. Room size is exactly what it sounds like. I don't know exactly what these numbers are like tied to, if it's like feet or meters or whatever, but if there's a large room size, think of like an auditorium. You know, think of like a large church where like when you speak or sing, it's like lots of reverb. It like echoes through the halls. The decay is how much that sort of sound carries in a room. But there are some pretty cool presets you can just choose. Outside club, vocal reverb. Let's try Great Hall. That one is like probably going to be pretty reverberant. You can kind of hear it. Maybe it's hard to hear on these speakers, and sorry for the people right next to them. It kind of has some like cool like sound to it. Oof. I like the way that sounds. And maybe I want to go a little crazy, and I want to punch that up with some distortion. I'm going to type in distortion into my effects. Scroll down, go to audio effects, distortion. Drag that onto there. Sounds pretty normal, but I'm going to go to my effects controls up here. I'm going to custom setup, edit. And I'm going to choose maximum pain in the presets and see how that sounds. Oh, sorry, everyone.
Maximum pain is right.
Yeah, truly. Tape drive. I'm going to turn down the volume. Sorry to freak everyone out there. It sounds a little crunchy, but I kind of like the way this sounds. It kind of makes it sound like, I don't know, there's a lot of energy involved in that hit. Cool. So, playing around. I'm going to